All right. Well, thanks to my 5 colleagues who've gone before me for giving impossibly good talks to follow. That's great. My name is Ryan Greysen. I'm a hospitalist at UCSF Medical Center. And as Beth mentioned, I am a self-proclaimed or self-described Luddite. I'm certainly not a technophile. And yet I'm here to try to convince you that we can use patient-centered mobile technologies to improve the patient experience of care, particularly in the hospital setting. How I got to this ironic position is an interesting story. So flashback 5 years ago, it was 2009, I just finished residency and I was starting my Roy Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program at Yale, and a colleague asked me if I was interested in helping her out with the project studying medical students' use of social media and medical schools' deans' perceptions about what they post online, and the focus was on unprofessional content. It was a great success, became kind of a seminal paper on the topic, and we went on to publish a bunch more papers on physician uses of social media, not just medical students, but practicing physicians. We tried to go beyond what the unprofessional uses of social media were and talk about this concept of online professionalism and how should we try to reflect well on the profession. I'm putting these up here not to brag, because I couldn't believe that I was publishing on this stuff and getting really good impact. I don't have a Facebook account. I had never used social media before I started writing on this stuff. And honestly, when my colleague came in and said, do you want to do some articles about social media, and we started writing about unprofessionalism, I was kind of like, yeah, down with Facebook. I don't even know what Twitter's about. Let's write some articles on it. But now, flash forward 5 years, I've come around. My opinions on the subject have changed a little bit. I'm still skeptical, but I'm now the social media editor for the leading journal in our field of hospital medicine. I have a fairly active Twitter account, and I'm writing editorials about how we should be more vigorously using social media like Twitter to spread our ideas from peer-reviewed publications to increase our impact. So I still have my skepticism about this, and what I tried to hone in on in making a pivot after I finished fellowship and came to UCSF, I tried to pivot away from just social media and thinking more broadly about technologies. And what really interested me about social media was this power, this ability to give patients a voice, or more broadly, people who use the internet to have the ability to customize their experience or personalize their experience of the internet instead of just consuming sort of static content that you get through TV or movies or what have you. And I was also intrigued by how social media could give voice to people, particularly who had not had a voice before or had really good ways to interact with others on topics of interest. So I thought, there's got to be something here. This stuff is powerful. You can publish on it. Even if I'm not going to become the king of Facebook or social media, I want to explore more about these abilities of technologies more broadly to engage patients in their care and try to improve their outcomes. So I still think I'm a little bit of an unlikely hero or unlikely champion for this. And so I sometimes look up to Jack Black in one of my favorite movies, Nacho Libre. He's a badly out-of-shape friar who wants to use wrestling, Mexican wrestling, become a luchador to benefit the orphans that live in his convent. So he's got a little bit of an uphill battle, and sometimes I think I'm that way too, something of an anti-hero, maybe with a little twist. So what do I mean by in using mobile technologies such as smartphones, tablets, and sensors to better engage patients in their care? I'll give you some examples from work that we're doing currently in our lab and ongoing work from others, but I think it would be best to frame the issue in terms of an issue outside of our profession. I want you all to think about the last time that you took a cab. Did it look anything like this? Even if it didn't, indulge me, humor me a little bit, and think about one of your worst experiences taking a cab. You probably had trouble getting the cab in the first place. You spent a lot of time trying to hail it. Or maybe you called it on the phone and spent an eternity on hold, only to get a surly dispatcher who wouldn't really be straight with you about when the cab was going to get there anyway. Then the cab arrives, you get in, it's a cramped space, it's maybe dirty, has kind of a funky smell, maybe the driver's got a little bit of attitude. When you finally get where you're going, now there's this awkwardness about how do I pay? Do you take a credit card? I don't have enough cash. How much do I tip? Do I feel guilty I didn't tip enough, too much? And then after they leave, if you're traveling on business, you realize you forgot to ask for a receipt. There is a different way to do it now. And I heard about this from our residents were telling me they were Ubering all over town. And being a Luddite, when I heard about this, I thought, oh, that's crazy, you know, why would I download some app to get a taxi to come and get me? That's for hipsters. But I tried it recently, and I have to say I was really impressed. How many people have used Uber before? Okay, it's San Francisco, so most people have. For those who haven't, it's an app. It uses pretty basic technology. You have to have a smartphone, yes, but it basically gears into your GPS and the GPS of the drivers and connects you so that you can see all the available cabs. They have several levels of different quality of cabs, but you can see all of the available cabs in your area. And once one has accepted your request, you can see where your cab is and follow it on the streets as it's getting close to you with a pretty accurate estimate of when it's going to get there. Once you get there, you notice that it's a cab that's usually driver-owned. It's their own personal car. It's really nice inside. The drivers are sort of a different level of professionalism. They're really friendly. Once you get to where you're going, there's no discussion about how you pay. Your credit card information is already in Uber, so it just goes seamlessly. The tip is standardized. You don't have to think about it. And then they send you the receipt by email, so you don't have to think about that either. And the best part, I think, is that after you've taken your ride, it asks you to rate your driver, and on the other end, the driver is asked to rate you. And at first I thought that was kind of silly, but it turns out this is part of Uber's model to revolutionize the taxi cab or the transportation industry. If you get too low of a rating, either as a driver or as a passenger, you can be booted out of the system. So if this is very empowering for drivers. If they have people who are real jerks and a string of obscenities and abusive passenger, they can rate them really low and you can get kicked out of the system so you can't use Uber. Same thing with the drivers. So there's a real incentive for them to show up with their car really nice and to be really nice to you because they can lose their privilege of participating in this system. So think about that experience of taking a cab and now think about the experience that patients and families have coming into the hospital. In a lot of ways, there's some parallels. Once they get into the hospital, they're sort of along for the ride. And think about what it's like once you get to the hospital and you arrive at your hospital bed, and what kind of bedside technology do you have there to keep you engaged? Pretty primitive, right? It's this clunky white box that has a cable on it. It has 3 or 4 buttons. Maybe you can change the channel on your TV. If you press enough times on the red button in the middle, maybe you'll get through and you can shout on through this intercom to a patient care tech or a unit clerk who can then relay the message to your nurse that you have some issue. God forbid you want to actually talk to your doctor because then all of that has to happen. And then on top of that, the nurse has to do what? They have to get the doctor with one of these, a beeper. I mean, I'm a Luddite, but are you kidding me? I mean, this is like 1970s technology, right? We're the only industry, I think, that still uses these things as a mainstay of how we do business. So I think we could do better. And if you look at most industries outside of healthcare and then compare it to us, we're really behind in terms of consumer-oriented technology to engage people in the process they're engaged with, in this case, healthcare. So where do we start? So I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we have going on in our lab. When I first got here, under the guidance of my mentor, Andy Auerbach, we started giving tablets to patients on the floor. And at first, we just wanted to see what they could do with them. And we were a little bit worried that they would get lost or stolen or exposed to various fluids that would make them malfunction. None of that turned out to really be a problem. And then we worried, like, well, patients will be, they won't be interested or they won't be able to operate them. That turned out to be not such an issue either. We found that with an RA that's trained to train the patient to use the tablet, on average, people need 15 minutes or less. Those who are older or less experienced with technology, we found that they were 15 to 30 minutes on average to orient, but in the end, they were just as able as the people who oriented quickly to do the tasks that we set out for them, which were pretty basic initially. We just wanted them to enroll in MyChart, our patient portal, if they hadn't already. We found that upwards of 75% had never used a patient portal before, so we had to figure out how to get them enrolled. And then we asked them to navigate to certain tabs to look at their medications, to try and send a message to a provider. Building on that, we also have done a study recently that involved 12 hospitals around the country, including the general and our medical center. And we asked patients who were readmitted about their uses of technology outside the hospital. And we found that most of them were online and were using their online access at home for health purposes, but about 20% or actually less were using it for some of these key tasks for post-discharge recovery, such as refilling their medications, communicating with their providers, or managing their appointments. So very similar to what we saw in our local experience with the tablets, 1 in 5 patients was using their portals. So I think there's a real implementation gap. Patients are already going online, but they're not able to do these tasks that would allow them to engage more in their healthcare through their patient portal. So one way to look at this problem is to focus on the 20% of people who are already engaged, who are already using their patient portals, and try to make them into super users, or try to engineer new things that we can do for those people that will eventually trickle down to everybody else. And I think this is a little bit guided. That's just kind of, great, so we can conquer the tip of the iceberg. And you see this outside of healthcare too, in consumer electronics. I mean, look at, I'm wearing a Fitbit here. Who wears Fitbits? There are people who generally already fit, right? Where's the fun in that? So I think we need to look at this differently. I think we need to invert the paradigm. Think about the people who are least likely to engage, who are least likely to be using their patient portal or to otherwise be using mobile technologies to engage and participate in their healthcare. Let's design our interventions with those people in mind first. And it's important to do that, I think, because if we engineer for those patients successfully, then the innovations will diffuse up rather than trickle down. But it's not a matter of the least common denominator. I hate that phrase. I think it's important to engineer for this patient population, the most vulnerable, the oldest, the sickest, the frailest, the poorest, because I think they have the most to lose and potentially the most to gain if we're successful in this. These next set of images I want to credit to a colleague at the University of Alabama, the director of their ACE unit, Kelly Flood. I just thought this was a really compelling analogy she had about health being like a plateau. And if you're a relatively healthy person and you're hospitalized, you've probably come off of the peak of your plateau a little bit, but the foundation of your health is broad and the slopes for recovery are not that steep. Great, so if we engineer for these folks, they're likely to get back up on top of the hill. But the people that I'm really worried about are the people who are standing on a really tight peak. They don't have a lot of reserve. If they fall, they're going to fall hard and they're going to fall fast. And these are precisely the patients, the oldest, the sickest, the poorest, the most alone, the least educated, who are the least likely to be engaged in their care and the least likely to be using these technologies. I think we need to invert the paradigm of how we think about who we engage with these technologies and go after these folks. It may be challenging, but I think, again, if we're successful, the rewards will be the most rewarding as well. Just wanted to give you a couple examples from some work from others and some of the current projects we're working on. This is a picture from an article published by a group at Mayo in the last year. They put Fitbits and modified them. They put them on the ankles of post-op patients. They put them on their ankles because they're shuffling around the wards. They're not walking with their usual gait, so they don't go on the wrist. But they successfully showed that patients who were ambulating the most were the least likely to go home or to need rehab or to go to a nursing home. And the patients who were ambulating the least were the most likely to go there. Well, what we want to do on top of that, which we think is novel, is to try and use this information and push it back to patients, families, and providers on the floor. We have an epidemic right now of immobility in hospitalized patients, particularly those who are the oldest, the sickest, the frailest. We put them in a hospital bed, they sit there, they get hospital-acquired disability. They maybe came into the hospital functional, but they leave with functional disabilities. So I think this is not a simple solution. There will be a lot of issues that arise from it, one of them being safety, but I think we can find a way to use these technologies to engage these patients and get them mobilized. So one possible idea about the safety element, again, using technologies that are already existing and not trying to engineer 20 years into the future. There is existing technology for the Xbox, that there are these dancing games that the sensor can see your body movements and insert you into this virtual dancing game. We could use these also to identify people who are maybe ambulating and have an unsteady gait to try and identify those who are heading towards a fall, or maybe patients who aren't supposed to be getting out of bed that are trying to climb out of bed. There's a successful pilot program going on at Mount Zion using video monitoring, where they're having trained patient care techs watch continuous video monitoring of a few beds there, and they've reduced the falls by half. We could use the technology to make it so that we don't have to employ an army of people just staring at a TV screen. Maybe it could bring the feed of people who are on the edge of a fall or at danger to the attention of someone who's trained to watch for that. So it's not replacing a human, but making what a human does more effective, more efficient. And then finally, we have a project that we're working on right now using avatars that were developed at Boston University as part of their Project RED. They developed them to do better discharge education at the point of discharge. Patients really love them. They're not a substitute for the nurse and for the other education we do, but what it allows patients to do is go over some things that they might feel guilty asking the nurse to repeat. And the avatar has got nothing better to do. It can explain to you as many times as you want. And it can also prompt you to ask some questions that you might not think if you're in the hurried exchange with your doctor or your nurse and waiting for your ride to go home from the hospital. We're taking this technology and trying to move it up or forward in the admission process, putting it in front of patients when they first arrive to do basic goal setting, and also to do more engaged symptom management throughout their stay in the hospital, and also to engage them in thinking about the most challenging aspects of their transition when they do go home early on in the admission, so that we can identify what those issues are and start to address them early rather than when the car is waiting outside and we're hurrying through the discharge process. So I think this is an incredibly opportune time, especially here at UCSF. A lot of these things that we're doing can be very synergistic with the Department of Medicine and the UCSF healthcare system strategic priorities. We have, at our hospital, a really great opportunity this year when there's shifting of some of the clinical services. The labor and delivery suite on the 15th floor of Moffitt and Long is moving over to Mission Bay, and we have the opportunity to kind of redesign that floor and think about how we want to do things differently. We're conceptualizing that floor as our ward of the future. And it may sound like a little bit of hubris, but we don't intend it to be gimmicky or superficial. We don't envision a ward that's designed out of the Jetsons or something that you would see if the Apple Store were designing a hospital. But what we're trying to do is think really deeply about how can we use existing technologies to try and improve patient and families' abilities to engage in their care and try to personalize their experience of care in the hospital. And how can we do that in a way that, that is valid, reproducible, can be disseminated throughout our hospital, throughout our medical center, and to other places as well. We have some ideas about how to do that, but my call to action is to engage you all and to think with us about what would a better hospital floor look like? How can we use the existing technologies, and how can we think forward to what hospital care ought to look like 10, 20 years from now? Our ward of the future isn't really a destination, but I do think it's an exit. It's an invitation to depart from the path that we're on and think about new ways that we could do this. So thanks for taking the ride for me, and would love to have your comments.